This week, Daniel Trauner, Senior Director of Security at Shiniest, is going to discuss why technology changes, but often security stays the same. Antranig Vartanian, the CEO of Illuria Security, will discuss the state of security of current Unix-like systems. Lastly, in the security news, dirty pipes, UEFI firmware flaws, strange social engineering, command Amazon devices to go hack themselves, TL storms, Article 45.2 and why it's a bad idea, misconfiguration leads to compromise, 10 signs of a poor leader, when power supplies attacking SATCOMs, and the campus master key. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
Cybercriminals are working overtime. Last year in the fourth quarter alone, phishing attacks disguised as COVID testing information increased by 521%. Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Find out about the 13 email threat types and how Barracuda can provide complete email protection for your teams, your customers, and your reputation. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
And welcome to the show. But first, let me tell you about our host. He's a guy that loves the dirty pipes. So let's get to it. Mr. Paul Sidorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 731, recorded on March 9th, 2022, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. None other than Mr. Larry Pesce.
Hey, how's it going?
To my left.
How's it going?
What's up, man?
Same stuff, different day. Fun week at work.
Fun week at work. Work should be fun.
It should always be fun. Sometimes it's not, but it's
in general, it should be fun. Right? There's always not fun things about really any kind of situation like that. Right? But largely it should be fun.
If it was always fun, it would be a hobby.
Yes.
Right?
True.
But
even sometimes hobbies you get.
But sometimes you turn your hobbies into a job, and then it's a job, and it's not always fun.
It's true. So. Mr. Josh Marpet is here with us. Josh, welcome.
Well, hello. Pleasure to be here as always, my friends.
Mr. Lee Neely is here with us. Lee, welcome.
Good to be here, and remember, you can't call a plumber to fix those dirty pipes.
This is true. Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us. Tyler, welcome.
Howdy. Happy Wednesday.
You getting any sleep lately? Have you caught up with your sleep?
Not a wink, man. Not a wink.
Not a wink. Get on that. Not until after the show, though. Don't miss.
I think I can hang for that long.
Okay. That's good. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe, where you can subscribe to any of our podcast feeds, have all new content downloaded to your phone every single day. We produce a lot of podcast episodes here at Security Weekly, as well as we have a mailing list, Discord server, social media accounts, and streaming platforms. You can find it all at securityweekly.com/subscribe. Daniel Trauner is the Senior Director of Security at Shiniest, a cybersecurity asset management company. Daniel joins us today to discuss why, even given unusual circumstances like hypergrowth or Web3 applications, sometimes we should focus on more basic issues instead of the newest, shiniest security tools and techniques. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It is nice to have you here, my friend. I would like to first ask you how you got your start in information security.
I honestly emailed a lot of people and called a bunch of people, and one day I didn't hear anything, and then someone said, "Hey, I saw your resume on my desk, and I thought about talking to you about an internship." And we had a conversation. I didn't know it was the interview at the time. It was just like a 40-minute conversation, and I realized eventually, oh, he's interviewing me. And then I got an internship, and that was at HP Security Research.
That's awesome. Did you intend to go into security, or you were just like, I need a job?
Oh, no. I went to liberal arts school, so I actually studied a lot of things and, a lot of interests. And this was just something that's always been an interest for me. I think I was always a little bit of a problem. My like high school IT admin. Didn't know it was me, but it was me. So
That's awesome. And what do you do today, Daniel?
So today I manage a security team at Exonius. We're an asset management company, and we have a few different arms of security. Internally, we have our platform security that does the product security for the things we sell. We have an internal security engineering team for sort of all the corporate projects and other things that aren't things we sell. And then we have an operations team that does, mostly DFIR.
And so do you oversee all those teams or just specific ones?
Yeah, so we're hiring a lot. So, at this point, some of those functions are relatively young. Our platform security team, I'd say, is the most mature of the three. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we just closed a round recently, and that's, going to help, I think, with the talent shortage.
Nice. So you oversee all three of those teams is what you're saying, because you don't have enough people.
Yes.
I gotcha. So
I guess I do a little bit of everything on each of those teams as well. Yeah.
So a liberal arts degree to an internship and now a senior director of security. There's a lot of stuff that
Pretty
probably
much
happened in between some of those things. I mean, maybe not liberal arts to internship. There's probably a lot packed in there that got you where you are today.
Yeah, I think I've always had a pretty broad array of interests, and that's turned out to be an advantage.
We do need to know, I wouldn't say a lot or little, but enough about a wide variety of things to work in many positions in this field.
Yeah, I think having the attacker mindset, the defender mindset, that's a big one. Certainly, if you can think of both those areas, if you have just a lot of perspectives you can pull on, that's always going to be an advantage.
So why?
I mean, you were.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so we're reaching for the shiniest thing. Why are we doing that? Like, what problems are we trying to solve that we think reaching for the shiniest, newest thing will solve for us?
Yeah, well, certainly a lot of the newer vendors, they have really cool technology, or they've been able to solve problems which maybe only a small number of people have, or maybe people don't realize they have. But some of those techniques, while they're really cool, they don't address some of the more basic problems. I look at some of the current events that happen, and when you have a major vulnerability in a component like Log4j or something else that's going to be very fundamental and widespread, potentially easily exploitable, some of these other tools aren't going to really help you address that, right? So when you find out something like that's happened, you actually have to do something about it, and figuring out where the things are that are affected, what business processes are affected, what do you do? Those are all questions that I think some of the newer tools they don't really help you see in a fundamental way, right? When things are on fire, you don't need a really fancy hose to put it out. You just got to figure out what's on fire. What's the impact of that? How do I stop that, right?
What's on fire? You really have to kind of know what you have to know what you can look at that's on fire. Correct? It's a good starting point.
Yeah. And certainly, we make a tool that does it to a large degree, but I spoke to a startup recently that I was advising, and they said, well, we want to do asset management. What do we do? And I said, just make a spreadsheet. That company has 15 employees.
So does your tool take a more automated approach where you're looking at it passively, actively? Is it internal network, external network, cloud services, SaaS? Like what kind of assets are you looking at managing, and kind of what information can you glean from that to make more readily available and educated decisions when you're looking at those assets?
Yeah, I would say it's all the above. We basically look at APIs from other services. So anything an API exposes, you can read, and that turns out to be a lot of information. And then you have to obviously aggregate it, dedupe things, do all that cleanup. That's most of where the heavy lifting comes in.
I want to go back to startups and something that I think many of us struggle with, maybe from a different perspective, right? In that there's large companies that make security solutions, and they might make like a really big platform to solve a specific problem. More than likely, if they're publicly traded or what have you, they've got lots of different solutions kind of under one umbrella, and they've diversified because they've had to. And then you go all the way down to the startups, and they seem to solve like one kind of like point solution, but maybe do it like really creatively or really well. And so like, Daniel, how do you balance in between them, right? I mean, we all want to go to like one place and have one platform. I think we all know that there's some significant challenges with that. but there's also challenges managing 4,800 different point solutions. How do we balance?
Yeah, well, I certainly think the answer isn't either extreme, right?
Yeah.
You have to look for point solutions if you're going to use them that address a pretty niche problem that's pretty tightly scoped. I think if you have something that's a very unbounded scope, or you're not sure, there's a lot of unknowns basically, then sometimes those point solutions won't work as well. But I've had really good experiences sometimes, even going for seed or A stage startups. You of course have to vet their security too,
Sure.
depending what they're doing for you. But they build something that is just really that much better than the alternative, and it is a pretty narrow scope problem, right? I look at things like, WireGuard wasn't a VPN a few years ago, and then it became pretty popular, and a lot of products were building on top of WireGuard. And sometimes if you need a VPN and you need to do a very small set of things, WireGuard's just better. And so some of the products that were built with that added enterprise features like SSO and other things, and those just made it what it needed to be. It didn't need to have all the bells and whistles, doesn't need to solve all your problems. It was just really good at that specific thing.
Well, that's a really great point, though, Daniel. I think a lot of times we gravitate towards, I have this problem, I need a solution, and it has to have all the bells and whistles. And if it doesn't, I can exclude like huge swaths of that sector. But in reality, keep it simple. I don't know what's got me on the keep it simple kind of train lately, but just keep it simple. I think we tend to overcomplicate things.
So I've got a couple of questions for you, man, if you don't mind. You were at BugCrowd, so you handled the platform security for BugCrowd, right?
Yep.
Okay, and now you're at an asset management company on effectively the other side of the table. You're now handling a product that helps to categorize and catalog all of the assets that a potential BugCrowd target or a red team or a cyber criminal could be targeting. And I will tell you that I consider asset inventory and asset management to be the core, or at least the foundational element of most security and most security tools. And so you're really sort of on opposite sides of the table. How do you feel about that? Is that fascinating to you? Is it different? Talk.
Sure. I think BugCrowd, the most fascinating thing was, we got to see the back end of hundreds of security teams. And this was everyone from the most advanced security team in industry or, up there, all the way down to companies that had a single person who unfortunately had sort of all of the security roles by themselves, which, companies should stop doing that because it doesn't work. And getting to see all the different techniques that were used against these different targets, right? So you have mature security team or immature security team, then you have different skills of attackers as well. You got to see a lot of techniques, and I think those techniques ultimately manifested in defenses or even things to look out for. So there were classes of bugs or sort of ways to exploit bugs, like subdomain takeovers were a very popular one in bug bounties a few years ago. And once that became popular, suddenly it was something that defenders were interested in looking for. And so now, taking that knowledge to the other side, I often think about those things, right? There's a lot of kind of tactical defenses you can add that are niche, that are going to affect, small scopes of your environment, but work really well or are really cheap to implement. So that's kind of how I tie it together. But I have to say, I do miss more of the offensive side. It was pretty fun.
Cool. So I've got kind of a product question for you. Your Axonius is an asset management tool, right? I've also heard the that type of tool called a cyber attack surface management tool as well, and I think they're different. But what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, well, there is a category out there for like public attack surface management. I've seen a lot of different acronyms. I lose track of the Gartner ones.
I know. That's what kills me.
I call it ASM. I call it attack surface management, and there's a whole host of vendors in that space that I tend to put in different categories than Axonius in your competitors.
There's actually a new one now, though. There's actually a CAASM.
What?
So we're like the really cool vendor in the CAASM space.
Is that
CyberASM?
Cybersecurity chasm?
It's cyber asset attack surface management.
Cyber asset attack surface management. Okay.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a mouthful. I will say, though, that the main difference, and there were a bunch of products that came earlier than ours that were focused on discovering public assets. So I think ASM is the one that you see more often for that. And ASM products would basically use a lot of techniques, a lot of which were actually discovered by bug bounty hunters, to do enumeration of subdomains and all kinds of things just to look up, to try and enumerate attack surface of usually a domain or an IP, and then you sort of pivot. But yeah, different space. They're adjacent, though. Certainly, one of them is useful data to feed into something like Exonius, but we also look at a lot of private data, too.
Yeah, I look at asset management as more the internal view than the external view, but also incorporating things that you can more easily plug into that solution. Like, yeah, I can go scan a whole copy of the internet and look for stuff that might be mine. Or if I know that I do have an account at this particular cloud provider, I can plug that into my asset management service and just know what goes on there, right?
Yeah, I think that it's good to combine them, right? To be able to see also what can you discover publicly, right? What can someone who has no access to your company see is there? And then cross-reference that with all the stuff that you have from your internal point of view and then correlate it. So you can see I have, this EC2 instance and maybe it's public, and so there's a domain name associated or something like that. You can discover it publicly, but you can also see in your inventory that it's discoverable privately, and that's where I think you get the really good sort of synergy.
Yeah. No, I agree, Daniel, because I always question from an external point of view, if someone just got out their credit card and started spinning up, an AWS instance, they're going to get assigned a random IP address and a random domain name, and it can be really hard to go, oh, that's actually mine, right? Unless they submit an expense report to it, and accounting tells me that it's there, but that can be too late. That's why I kind of like all of these different methods to continuously discover all of your assets.
Well, it should also go along with authorization and access control. I mean, this should be something that, all right, so we have 100 AWS instances. I'm making this up, bear with me. I've got 100 AWS instances. Somebody just spun up an AWS instance that we had no control over. They used a personal credit card, a corporate credit card, whatever. We're not going to know that until we get, hey, there's a new Amazon account on our expenses. What the hell? Just like you said, okay? But what you are going to know is that somebody's trying to access it using a corporate account. So they're trying to go out, trying to access this, and they're trying to move data there. So this is where it starts integrating with things like DLP. This is where it starts integrating with things like the asset management, where it says, hey, that's not part of ours. We need, if you want to access it, that's fine, but you've got to have some access controls on it and some authorization around it. So just pointing out that it's not a tool in and of itself. There's other things that integrate with it or should.
Yeah. Sure, and I think you should consider users assets to some degree too, right? Users and roles and identities. That's also sort of part of the picture.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, kind of where do you see things like Active Directory or like you said, single sign-on? Where do those things fit in? Where you have computers that are assets, you've got user accounts that are assets, you've got roles that are assets, but you also have applications and versions of applications. So do all of those things also fit underneath of that umbrella, or should those be kind of a separate product, separate collection?
Yeah, it does get complicated. I will say early on, I asked, when I joined Exonius, I was like, well, what's an asset? And people were like, I don't know what to say. But I would say, you can look at anything that, could be potentially relevant in the context of some business process. That's one way that you can look at it. You can say, well, we have this process where we sell our product, and you can start to break down all of the things that are associated with that. And that might be not just, computers, servers, like laptops, that type of stuff, or users. Even might have stuff like various cloud assets, S3 buckets. You could technically refer to another SaaS provider as an asset themselves, or at least their infrastructure, which you don't manage, but it's still an asset in the context of, how you have to think about the landscape of all your stuff.
In the landscape of all the stuff that we have to protect, Daniel, where do we start? I mean, do we start with what's been most widely kind of talked about and has a website and a logo and a name and a song and a dance? Or are there better places to start?
When I'm actually giving a talk at RSA this year about starting a security team at a startup, and the interesting thing I found is that the most basic thing is the people, right? So As you might expect, and you all are security people, phishing is one of the worst threats that's out there, and there's things related to that which are problematic, like not having MFA or password reuse. So, I think we end up starting with most of the sort of identity and access management things, like enforcing, like using single sign-on everywhere, enforcing MFA with the single sign-on. Those are the things that have the highest ROI, and we actually found that the sort of user happiness went way up, because turns out that having a single set of credentials and a nice looking mobile app to say yes, this is me when I'm logging in, or even like a hardware key, that's a pretty good user experience for logging into all your stuff. So that's typically where I would suggest starting.
How do people best evaluate the security solutions that are out there? I'd imagine in your time, Dan, you've done some quite a few evaluations.
Yeah, risk management and vendor reviews. I think the problem that you see with them today is when we receive them, right? When someone wants to buy Exonius, we get to see some of these, and there's like a 400 question questionnaire. Now, if you're a really big company, you can bully someone into filling out a 400 question questionnaire. But the reality is, you don't need all that information. And most of the people who are given that many questions either don't answer it accurately, or, they try and autofill it from stuff, and it's just a mess. So we actually found that kind of simplifying that down to a much, much shorter process, trying to focus on some of the really basic things, stuff like, does your product support single sign-on? What certifications do you have? Sort of stuff like ISO 27001, those kinds of things. Asking for the latest pen test report. And you get a sense by asking a much smaller list of questions. I think ours is around 20. And that is something we only do if we really think we have to. So there's other signals we can look at to determine if a vendor is high risk or not. But I have to say, there's no perfect answer. I haven't even seen a good product that solves this problem. So I know there's probably vendors that will claim they solve it, but the reality is just kind of focus on the really core questions and then evaluate vendors, with as sort of a similar lens as you can every time, because you don't want to end up sort of evaluating things with different criteria, because then it'll be hard to compare.
Do you put the actual products in your network and use live data to evaluate the functionality?
Often not, but sometimes. And if we do that, then of course we sort of treat it like a production onboarding, and it's there's other steps involved. But if we can, we do everything in development for evaluation. But you're right; it can be very hard to evaluate a product effectively without real data.
Yeah, the lab stuff is only but one picture, right? Things seem to be different when you do it. Things are always different in production. Damn it.
They're always different.
But the lab is just as important, because most of those labs are connected, no matter how hard operations try.
It's very true.
And attackers dev labs are just as vulnerable, and they do and make the same mistakes. So it's not just a problem with inside of corporate America. It's ransomware has the same issues.
Did you see the thing from the Conte labs where they were like, make sure you have EDR on all of our machines?
Amazing. Yeah.
It was really funny.
Well, I love seeing how these organizations are just run like, B2B software companies. They have their Jira, and they have their, like SDL and all this other stuff. And it's, I don't know why.
Hey, they have health insurance.
I guess it makes sense, but it's still funny to think about.
They have health insurance and pay their people, they have dress codes for some of their developers. Okay. And cubicles. Like, you can go to work for a cyber criminal gang and wear a necktie and go work in a cubicle with a lunchbox. Like it's crazy.
But you don't know your work. So, there's that.
Yeah. Okay. But I mean, the Conte, whatever, the Conte gang was had emails from the latest leak about how they, make sure we have EDR and everything, make sure we're locking down the firewalls. We wouldn't want any of our guys or anybody like our guys to get in. And it's like, wow.
Well, it turned out to be an insider threat, right?
Yeah, imagine that. Yeah, I think where you're going, Daniel, right, is we tend to think of cyber criminal gangs as highly disorganized and just rogue, because I still think we have this picture when we read about hackers from history that they're the lone person and they're just kind of doing it for fun, and maybe they can make some money, but they're largely acting as a single entity, one person, for example. But today they look like more like companies. They just happen to violate the law.
Organized crime. And there's a reason why it's called organized crime, because it's organized.
It's organized.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they could have used for some asset management to know what they needed to tear down when they're tearing everything down, because a lot of stuff does get left around. So again, same correlation, same problems in corporate America. If you don't know you have stuff or you don't track that, it leaves you vulnerable to insider threat, attackers, name any number of things.
Dan, you said before. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say another good example of that is you look at what happened to Ubiquity, right? That kind of thing. It turned out to be insider threat. I mean, when it first happened, I was like, "Whoa, that's pretty crazy," and I thought about like how that might have happened. But when it turned out to be insider threat, I was okay. Well, that explains it, and also like having one person who's able to like go in and delete all of your your like serious log archives. It's not separate. I don't know. That kind of stuff is very hard to track down when you get really big, especially if you're, acquiring companies, if you're growing really fast. It's just part of asset management.
Sorry, I had a question and now I lost it. It was right there.
It's right on the tip of your tongue.
On the tip of my brain.
What are some of the newer and more novel mechanisms that you're seeing from the space of asset management? Like, there's got to be at least some different approaches to how asset management is done. Have you seen anything that's kind of unique or that you guys are doing that's unique, or even your competitors? What kind of stuff is out there that's working well?
Yeah, well, there are definitely tools out there that we like to use in conjunction with ours, right? So ours is just a repository that can connect to so many different APIs. But one I really like it's an active scanner is Rumble. Rumble is doing some really, really unique things as far as the techniques they use to discover things and to fingerprint them. It's also very performant. It's all around just really awesome tool. And I think that one of the best ways to do asset management is to combine both those techniques. So to have some active scanning, which is going to be limited because not all networks are connected. And, if you don't have a scanner somewhere where it needs, to scan a network, it's not going to see those assets. And to combine that with the passive approaches that connect to APIs, that way you're going to account for all those disparate networks and other issues. So I think combining those two is really cool, but I definitely look at Rumble as, pretty awesome tool for the active space.
You said earlier, Daniel, that a spreadsheet when you're a really small company probably works. How do you move up from there? I think you might have talked about maybe the second step, right, which is like get Rumble. But for me, that tends to fall down when everyone's working remotely and all your stuff is hosted in the cloud. So how do we take that next step from spreadsheet to, we could use Rumble, right? But I'd have to put it on every the client on every person's machine in the company for working remotely.
I think you won't be able to really track the end user laptops or those types of assets effectively with a network scanner when everyone's remote. So that's why it's important to use a combination of approaches. So at the early stages, I've seen companies do sort of custom in-house things where they maybe fetch data from one or two sources that they know work. So maybe they have their MDM tool and that's going to fill the gap, and they use Rumble in their cloud environment where the networks are a little more predictable, and then they'll combine the data on their own. So that's typically what I see in between. There's sort of the spreadsheet stage where you have your weekly calendar reminder to update the spreadsheet, but there's only like 10 people and 10 laptops, and it's really easy. But then when you get to a certain size, inevitably someone will automate it. Someone who joins the company whose job it is to make that weekly calendar reminder is going to go, I don't want to do this. I know Python. I'm going to fix this. And that's typically where it starts. And then you get to a point where that approach doesn't scale very well, right? There's either too many sources, so you're wasting too much time writing all of your own custom integrations, or the aggregation part is too hard, right? You end up with, once you have all the data, trying to dedupe stuff just becomes almost impossible.
Is that where you go to a single sign-on to get a handle on some of that? Or is that more of a policy-driven thing? Because, again, people have credit cards and stuff, and they can spin up any number. I guess, do you consider a third-party SaaS solution in asset? Inevitably your assets and your data ends up in there.
That's a big problem. Is the definition of an asset can be tiny or huge, and you've got significant problems understanding what an asset is. How do you control the assets? I worked at one company or consulted to them. I forget. It's been a long time. Where it was they wanted to stop anybody from sending data out to a file storage solution, Citrix File Share or Google Drive or whatever. So they locked everyone down, and then they had a developer who set up a S3 bucket with a randomly assigned domain, and all they put on that domain was a file picker a box and submit. So they would literally just type in very carefully off a piece of paper, type in the domain, and pick the files they wanted to upload and hit submit, and it would just take the files. So like there's so many problems with assets and shadow IT and DLP and everything working together. It's not fun.
Yeah, well, earlier you mentioned actually looking at your accounting system. There are products that do that. We actually built one. That was the second thing we built because we realized the SaaS side doesn't work from a traditional perspective, right? You can't use an API to figure out that someone spun up, I don't know, a new Dropbox account. But you can use, NetSuite to figure out that someone spun up a new Dropbox account if it's a credit card that has a charge from Dropbox. So I think that it's natural to see a little bit of a difference between the products that manage SaaS tools specifically, and those are often, they can connect to stuff like, any accounting software to pull in that data. But then on the sort of server side, it's a little harder. Like looking at your AWS bill would be, I don't know, that's weird, right? You can't discover the fact that an account exists if someone just spins it up on their own. So
yeah, there's whole companies that help you analyze your AWS bill.
Yes, it can get expensive.
Yeah, so I think the message is multiple sources, right? And now does like Axonius bring all those together? Is that, as you mature as a company, you're going to want one place to figure out where all your assets are and what they are and kind of centralize everything? And that's really more the enterprise play, right?
Yeah, after hundreds of machines, I think you get to a point where the biggest problem is just that correlation and deduping and stuff. That's where to do that on a regular basis, to kind of have it automatically work. Are two assets with the same host name the same asset? Well, maybe, but maybe not. You could look at like MAC addresses, other things, but that becomes a very, very, very complicated sort of matching algorithm you have to do when all the different sources return different sets of data. But yeah, that's what I would say is basically at a certain scale, it's usually somewhere in the hundreds of machines. Or if you have, very complicated architecture, maybe you have remote employees, stuff like that. It kind of runs away from you. So that's the idea.
With the software bill of materials, we run into the same kind of problem because you can have the same piece of software, the same library, and 4 different shrink wrap applications or home built or whatever, and they might be slight differences of version or patches or the way that it's called or things like that, but it's effectively the same library. So there's the huge questions of which one is the master copy, which one is the the copies of the copy, et cetera. Which one does a different patch level make it a different asset, to be listed in the SBOM or whatever. It's crazy stuff, man. That's a non-trivial problem.
Yeah, I saw a tool recently that all it does is check it to see if you're using a typo squatted package by accident. And which is crazy to me, but I guess, you get to a point, you have a lot of libraries, so.
Tyler's taking notes.
Well, no, again, that gets back to the
tool.
The very highly point solution that a startup has, right? Because they have to focus on something. And I could see that being startup, like, hey, we can tell you when someone's typo squatting one of your libraries, and we can be the best at that, right? And then usually they grow and expand from there. But it's not a bad starting point, actually.
I was going to say, just knowing what libraries you have is very difficult today. So software bill of materials is super important, especially in very large corporations or governments. But that's something that most companies, we'll even say the top 1% of companies in the 1% are not even looking at or evaluating from a risk management standpoint yet. So I think this is just scratching the surface what's going to happen eventually.
Yeah, my small, tiny app, I was like, I think I got a pretty good handle on the packages. And then I was like, till I started looking at the JavaScript. And I'm like, what is that? Oh, crap. And then I'm like, what if I changed? Regression testing. It's really hard when multiple developers, are cycling through. Whether you're a small company or a large company. When you get into large companies, developers, change teams. Like, I was developing in this application. Now I'm going to go develop in that application, right? And those little traces that all developers leave behind, you're like, someone's going to look at that. And that's where I think we get into essentially paying money for solutions that tell us what we have, right? And then that becomes necessary in so many different areas of your business, as we've already established, big or small. You can that resounding endorsement for Axonius. You can send me a free T-shirt here at the studio.
Yeah, well, we take swag. No,
right.
But I think that the idea of asset management is a important and interesting one. And we talk about compliance, we talk about security, we talk about IT. If you don't know what you have, there's no way you can protect it, maintain it, monitor it, or make sure it's compliant. And so between Axonius, there's Rumble, there's Jupiter One, there's some great vendors out there that are really doing amazingly cool stuff. And each one has their own sort of flavor. Rumble is more of a scanner than anything else. It does have an asset management program, but it's designed to be very active. Axonius, Jupiter One, a couple of others, they're much more on the monitoring and management side than on they do scanning, don't get me wrong, not complaining. Actually, Jupiter One doesn't do scanning. They ingest, but they don't scan.
Right.
Yeah, we don't either.
So,
okay, same idea.
Where do we go from here, Daniel? Once we've got a good handle on assets, how do we go into vulnerability management, patch management? Is that kind of for me, it's the next logical step, although I think those two phrases for me, vulnerability management, patch management, mean totally different things than they did 10 plus years ago, right?
Yeah, well, I certainly think you have to ask yourself today if there's a new vulnerability, especially in something notable that's widespread. Like Log4j was pretty bad, but I mean, if you go back to some of the stuff that that's in like crypto libraries or affects TLS or something that's just really, really ubiquitous, then if you can't answer the question like where am I affected or how bad's the impact, you have to do something better. So I think vulnerability management, that is related to asset management, but there's a lot of nuance there, right? There's you need data on the installed software on your devices. So actually, as far as what we do, right, we can't tell the installed software unless you connect a data source that can tell you that already. So MDM or something like AWS SSM, like Systems Manager,
right,
or some other type of tool that pulls that data.
OS Query.
But I think
right, open
OS
source
Query
side, right? OS Query do that for you.
Yeah, totally. So basically you need to have the data on hand, and I think then being able to make sense of it is that next level. So vulnerability management's part of that, saying, well, here's the version of everything I have installed, which versions have vulnerabilities. That's like, I think, another level. So if you don't have the, what do I have, where is it, what process is it involved in, the levels above that are pretty hard.
Yeah, it's interesting having worked in vulnerability management, how I think we've kind of decoupled. There's a lot of different solutions, ways to skin that cat, where you do need the vulnerability library, though, right? The library of what software has vulnerabilities. I mean, you could probably get that from an open source, right? I guess my point is, can you get away without scanning from the three major scanning vendors? Maybe for a while in certain circumstances, perhaps. But I think that's why they've also added on a lot of additional functionality. I'm assuming integrations with asset management as well. Some have even pivoted into some asset management.
Yeah, like I really don't like vulnerability scanners, but we still use one, right?
Yeah. Because I think if I were to venture to guess, like if it was me and I was responsible for security, I may pick up one of those vendors because like they've got a really awesome database of what's vulnerable, right? And that's really what you're tapping into.
Yeah, and it does catch things, right? It's just that it's not, we can't rely on it to catch everything,
right?
But it will catch things occasionally, and typically when it does catch something, that means it's pretty easy to find. So means it should be fixed pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. And fixing it's a totally different, well, not in all cases, but it could be a totally different solution. It depends on what it is. You probably got multiple solutions to go in and fix stuff.
My favorite way to fix things is just to turn them off.
Yes, I love that. It's great, right? I've done that. Oh my God. This database and this web app, oh my God, it's so vulnerable. I'm like, just turn off those EC2 instances and we're good. We're good.
Yeah,
we don't need it anymore.
I ask everyone, hey, does anyone know what this is? And they're like, no. And it's like, well, it's being turned off tomorrow. So
scream testing, turn it off, see who screams.
Yep, that's right.
That's my favorite kind of testing.
Oh, I love it. I actually advocated that to a client today. They're like, well, how do we check that things are actually being used? I'm like, well, okay, if you ask and nobody admits that it's theirs, turn it off. They're like, well, that doesn't test if it's used. No, it absolutely does. If nobody screams, it's not being used.
Right.
And if somebody screams, go, why didn't you answer me?
Josh, we had in a former life, we did a pen test for some folks, and they wanted to see what a denial of service attack looked like against a system. We identified a couple of systems that were vulnerable to denial of service attack, and
they asked you to DOS them?
Yep, they asked me to DOS a server, and we did. And it crashed the server, and when it came back, it wasn't back and added into some group, which nothing that I did. So they were having some issues getting that virtual machine, that virtual server back up, and they just put it aside, and they were going to work on it later. And about 8 months after issuing the report that we talked about the systems that we found in the denial of service and the ones that we had tested and that they had observed it, they came back and said, Larry, we think you're in error here because of the 3 systems you identified, we can't find the third. I said, that was the one we denial of service. Do you remember? And something about the IP configuration and you couldn't get it back up. And they're like, oh, you're right. It's been 8 months and no one's used it. I think we should probably leave it off.
They got like a 2-for-1 on that.
They did. They got a twofer. I totally got a twofer.
How many? Okay, totally. Okay, so this relates to asset management as well as pen testing and everything else. How many pen tests are successful because of stupid crap that people just abandon and don't even think about? How many assets that Exonius finds do people go, we still have that running? What the heck?
Oh,
Turn it off.
That's my favorite. For a little bit at Exonius, I actually did some demos and actually was helping sell the product. And there was one demo I did where I ran a query for users in Active Directory that had admin that hadn't had a password change in 10 years. And the person, other than the demo was like, oh yeah, like, haha, it's funny. There were three accounts, and he knew about 2 of them.
And he knew about 2 of them. Oh.
Yes. He's like, hey, excuse me a minute. And suddenly people getting called over, they're pausing stuff. Comes back. He's like, yeah, we thought we turned that off like 4 years ago or something. And it's just, and it had been logged into as well, which was the scary thing. So yeah, this stuff tends to just rot. I think it stays there. You don't notice it. And the bigger you get, the worse it gets. I mean, that's just pretty natural.
It's an interesting kind of perspective to look at asset management on. And I think I've always kind of phrased it in my mind as this particular problem or challenge that, like, I want to know about stuff that should be there, and if it goes away, I would like want to be the first one to know. But I also want to have this list of like stuff that I should never see again, credentials that should never work again, and if they do, I want to be the first to know because that should not be there. That's kind of more of what, like, now if I think that's asset management, then if you tell me that that's part of asset management, like, I'm really even more happy than I was before about it.
Yeah, we keep tabs on things that we just think are scary if they pop up.
If they pop up again, yeah. So do you have that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's key, right?
Yeah. So that's caught a lot of things, right? It takes like not that long to write a little. Like we have a way of sending alerts or triggering actions from our product. Our product doesn't do them, but we call it to APIs to do them.
Yep.
But one of the most basic ones is we can just produce tickets or notifications. So I love when I get a ticket that some account was activated or created or something was done outside of a policy, and like I don't know, it gets created, it gets followed up on, and so those things typically don't get lost. Right. It's just, maybe we don't react to them right away sometimes, but they don't get lost, which is the important thing. And that's where most companies make a mistake.
Yeah, because I like going, I'm going to turn this site off. And it's because it's now hosted in the cloud. Means only a couple of commands or a script or a click, and that could be back. Like, I'm going to turn this off, and it should stay off. And like, I'm not going to delete it yet, just in case someone does complain. But I'm going to turn it off,
or I need something from it.
And then like a reminder. Okay, once it's been off for a couple weeks, then I want to pull it off. But I want my asset management to tell me if that ever comes back, because it should never come back.
That's a good. I think that's a good place for honey tokens, though, too, right? Like, I think asset management's a great place to keep track of that, have notes, and have alerts around it, but also have something like our next guest that has the honey tokens that you can actually say, all right, now if something actually queries this, hits this, or it does get turned on and used, at that point it sends off a red alert, and then we can do actions that quarantine on that, and we can throw up all the flags and start doing things.
You were saying, Daniel?
Oh yeah, I was saying honey tokens are great, and like stuff like we did something a while back with AWS keys that had no permissions, and we put them in a place on disk where they're supposed to be, but we didn't use like plain text keys on disk. And so if an attacker is on the machine and they say, hey, look, it's the AWS credentials file, and they try and use the keys, that would give us an alert. So that's another great way to do it.
Anything else on that asset? I'm sorry, my brain was kind of still going to how I would use it. I like it.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. But I mean, does Exonius or any of the asset management tools that you know of, do they support anything like honey tokens in terms of being able to create, track, and do they do any deception work?
No, it's deception is different category.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
I know there's an API to tie into that, so they could totally connect those two pieces together.
Cool. Any more questions? Any more questions for Daniel?
Oh, Tyler was saying something there.
Sorry, go ahead, Tyler.
No, I was just saying that was a very extended piece of silence right there.
Yes, it was.
I was curious about your wall. Actually, the painting is very unique, and I was curious if that was something you did. Someone did it for you.
Wow.
Wow.
No, that's a famous painting, isn't it?
Tyler, do you need to try the bologna, my friend?
Google that.
No, I know what it is. I'm curious if it's actually.
No, this is the green screen.
Wow, it looks really nice, actually.
Oh, the wave.
Yeah, when I went remote with COVID, I said, hey, maybe I should get like a nice microphone and a green screen and a light, and then I thought I was going to use it for like a month or two, and turned out it's been like a year or 2 years. So.
Yeah, that one actually looks really good. That one threw me for a loop there. That's nice.
Tyler, for the record, that is Under the Wave of Kanagawa, also known as the Great Wave, from the 36 Views of Mount Fuji by Hokusai. It's a Japanese woodblock print, otherwise known as Ukiyo-e.
Okay, that was the name I was thinking of. Like the first one.
I think I watched an anime with that name.
I didn't know.
And there you have it.
Daniel, we just have 5 questions left for you. Are you ready to play
Sure.
5 questions with Security Weekly?
Sure.
3 words to describe yourself.
I don't know. Focused, curious, interested.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
I feel like I played Cyberpunk, some kind of like brain hacking thing, like.
Nice.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Oh God, I feel like it would just be Untitled.
What is your favorite hacker movie?
Ooh, probably War Games. I think.
Nice.
Yeah.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Oh wow. I don't even know who I'd pick for that one. I feel like maybe 2 really different artists. That'd be fun. Trying to think of who I'd pick. I don't know. I have to come back to you on that one.
Like different music artists, like
Or art.
I'm thinking like painters.
like painters.
Or I guess
Oh.
you could.
I was
But
thinking
like 2 that are
Snoop
really
Dogg,
different.
Shania Twain would be 2 totally different.
Yeah,
artists.
totally opposite of the spectrum.
All right.
There you go, Daniel. Thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
With that, we'll take a short break. Coming up next, Antronig from Illuria Security. Stick around.